gospel reading today is from the book of Luke. It's from the very last chapter, and it's almost the very last passage. Where our text begins, the followers of Jesus are having quite the experience. The beginning of chapter 24 is when the women go to the tomb and they find it empty, and they're really not sure what to do, so they rush back and tell the other followers they're not sure what to believe. Peter comes to check it out. And then the next passage is when two disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, and we're told that's about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. And they're walking and they're talking, and they know that the women had gone to the tomb earlier that day and found it empty. They're not sure what to think. Jesus appears to them, but their eyes are kept from recognizing him. And their eyes don't recognize him until they're sitting at table and with him later that evening. And Jesus breaks the bread and blesses it and gives it to them, and then their eyes are opened and they recognize him. And then he vanishes from their sight. So they are wondering, okay, what's going on? So they rush back to Jerusalem to tell their other friends, and this is where our text begins today. I invite you to listen for a word that God might have for you this day. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the 3rd day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are my witnesses of these things." May God bless our understanding of the reading today. The resurrection of Christ is the central point of the Christian narrative told in the New Testament, in the Greek Testament. The resurrection is a story based on witness. The disciples of Christ, men and women, tell of these incredible encounters with the risen Christ. Stories of Jesus appearing to people after his death occur in all 4 Gospels and in the book of Acts. In reference to the resurrection, Paul tells us in his first letter to the Corinthians, Christ appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at once. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me, as if I was born at the wrong time. The resurrection has been discussed and debated, debunked and defended for the last 2,000 years. And still today, resurrection is a tricky subject. What does it mean? What did it mean for those witnesses of long ago? And what does it mean for us today, here, and now? I love the stories of Jesus appearing to his followers after his death because it just sounds so crazy, so incredibly crazy, and I love it. These poor disciples, terrified and grief-stricken, who aren't sure what to do next, are telling each other that Jesus has appeared to some of them when all of a sudden Jesus appears in the room. I can't even imagine. Can you? It's tempting to deride the disciples for being these bumbling fools, but really, they are so human, and so are we. I, for one, would not have gotten out of the boat to try to walk on water with Jesus. I would have totally fallen asleep at the Garden of Gethsemane. They had just celebrated Passover feast. There was wine. There was rich food. It's been a long day. I'm tired. There's a comfortable spot. And I would have totally looked at my friends in condescending disbelief if they had told me that Jesus had appeared to them. We had all just watched him die together. Wait, what? You saw who? Where? Are you sure? So enter Jesus into this scene, and I just imagine jaws hitting the floor like kerplunk. They're startled and terrified, and rightfully so, I think. What is going on? I have to think that the thought crossed a few minds, nobody is going to believe me when I tell them about this. Jesus' disciples, men and women, are so beautifully human. But instead of shedding his human form, Jesus appears before them in flesh and blood. Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts, Jesus says. Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Jesus was alive, and not just his spirit or some essence of him or a vision, but he was physically alive in their presence. His feet were on the floor, his arms were outstretched, and he was making eye contact with his beloved friends. He even ate a piece of fish in front of them, which I think is kind of weird, but he spoke and he opened their minds and declared them witnesses to the story. Jesus had embodied resurrection. Jesus was in his body and he was in the world. Jesus was alive on earth, was present in their midst, and was on the move. Resurrection of Christ is not just some doctrine that Christians believe, but it's a lens through which we see the world. Resurrection means having another chance, believing in a new day. The sun will come out tomorrow, similar to Annie. But I do want to be clear. It's not blind optimism, and it's not naive. Christian resurrection acknowledges that darkness and death is a reality in our lives. Suffering is real and does not discriminate. Pain falls on the just and the unjust without discretion. During Holy Week, about 5 days before Easter, a friend asked me if I was excited for Easter, and my response was, well, Easter will be wonderful, but we've got to get through Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday first. It's painful to recount the story of Jesus' death. It's painful to look at the darkness in the world and to know that as humans, we are capable of doing terrible acts against each other. We can turn to the Psalms, poems written 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, and hear voices crying out to God in pain, questioning the presence of the Holy One. Answer when I call, faithful God. You cleared away my trouble. Be good to me. Listen to my prayer. Janelle read for us today. The good news is that we wake up on Easter Sunday and we know that the tomb is empty. The good news is that God gives new life, rebirth, renewal, hope in despair, light in the darkness. The good news is that Jesus is alive, is present in our midst, and is on the move. Our opening hymn, Morning Has Broken, praises God for the recreation of each day, for the new opportunities that arise, for the fresh start, for being alive in our bodies and being alive on the earth. Our scriptures are rich with the joy of God's creation. Tremble but do not despair, says our psalmist. Attend to your heart, be calm through the night, worship with integrity, trust in the Lord. I'm a fan of The Moth, which is a nonprofit dedicated to the art of storytelling. I listen regularly to the podcast, which is called The Moth Radio Hour. And last week, a comedian named Mike DiStefano told a story of his experience losing his wife and his father in the same year. He was 28 and in a grocery store in West Palm Beach, Florida, when he fainted and woke up in the hospital with pneumonia. He felt like garbage, but was more concerned about getting home to his wife, who was dying of AIDS. He's lying in the hospital bed when his phone rings, and it's his friend calling to tell him that his wife has been in a car accident. The car flipped a few times, but they didn't yet know the condition of his wife, and Mike is helpless to do anything about it. But he's laying there in his hospital bed, and he's playing with these beads that he got from a Buddhist monk. And being raised Catholic, he refers to them as his Buddhist rosary beads. He had acquired the beads a few weeks prior to ending up in the hospital. He had seen an ad for a Buddhist place in the newspaper, thought that it looked interesting, and so he went. He says they were nice people, compassionate people, and Mike was asked if he would like to see the Lama. So he looks around thinking there's an animal in the room somewhere. But the woman led him to this little Tibetan priest, this little holy man who was bent over, praying and meditating. Mike had never seen this before, so he was wondering what was going on when the priest looked up and motioned for Mike to come sit in front of him. The priest looks at him and says, "West Palm Beach, thank you, thank you." Mike figured the guy didn't know very much English. So the little Tibetan priest puts his hand out and takes Mike's hands, and when they touched, Mike said that he instantly relaxed. He wasn't scared, and all the pain he had been holding just slipped away. The little man leaned forward so they had their foreheads together, and Mike says he felt really good and really happy. So when he leaves this place, he takes these little Buddhist beads with him that are blessed by this man, and he's playing with the beads in the hospital bed and thinking of this holy man and trying to keep it together when the phone rings, and it's his mother calling to say that his dad has a brain tumor. He was so overwhelmed that he didn't feel anything. He says, "I just froze." His phone rings a third time, and it's his friend calling to say that his wife is alive. She's in the same hospital as he is. She's actually downstairs in the emergency room, and he can go down and see her. Mike is so relieved, so he goes down to the emergency room, and all his wife has is a cut lip. She had survived the crash with only a few bumps and bruises. But she was still dying from AIDS, so a few months after this horrible day at the hospital, she passes. And 9 months after Mike's wife dies, he gets a call from his brother saying that his dad is gone. Mike says he literally felt his heart rip out of his chest. He felt the death of everyone, all in one moment. He got on the plane the next day to head to his father's funeral and had made the decision that he was going to end his life after the funeral. He has nothing else to live for, and he's done. And he says it wasn't going to be anything dramatic. He was at peace with his decision. So he's on the plane, happy that he's made this choice, and he gets up to go to the bathroom in the back of the plane. And there, sitting in the back row of this airplane, is that little Tibetan priest, that little holy man. And he looks up and he sees Mike, and he says, "West Palm Beach." And Mike is blown away that this man even recognizes him. So this man reaches out his hands and takes Mike's hands, and they put their foreheads together. And in Tibetan, it's called tonglen, putting of the foreheads together. And that's Tibetan for giving and taking. I will take all of your pain and replace it with joy. So Buddhist priests meditate for years, so their hearts are as big as the ocean, and they can contain the pain of other people and replace it with joy. Mike says he doesn't know if this always works with other people, but it sure worked for him that day on the back of the airplane. That little man, that little Tibetan priest who could barely speak any English, was able to take all of Mike's pain and grief and sorrow and replace it with joy so that Mike could go on living. Every new day, we embody resurrection. We wake up, we open our eyes, we sit up, we plant our feet on the floor, we breathe in, and we breathe out, and we move into a brand new day. Jesus embodied resurrection for us 2,000 years ago, and he embodies resurrection for us today because Jesus is alive. God is alive, and we come back here to church week after week because we can't hear this message enough. Jesus says, "Why are you frightened, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I, myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." Ultimately, the Christian message of resurrection is about hope. We have hope for a new day, that light will overcome darkness, hope that the love of God is stronger and more resilient than anything we have ever known, and hope that God is still at work in us and through us and with us today, tomorrow, and forever. And this is good news. Amen.